Hey, welcome to Deep Dive. I'm Joshua, the editor and producer of the show, and over the next 3 weeks, really the rest of April, we're going to be looking back at previous episodes in the archives with impactful and powerful messages that I think pair really well with the current sermon series we're working through, Everyday Rhythms. So on this previous Sunday, Pastor Lisa brought us a wonderful message on prayer, and really a call to action on how we should be leading our lives intentionally through prayer, and really just to call us to praying for 20 minutes every day, whether that's for coworkers, friends, neighbors, people we know, but to really lean into prayer and to commit to it fully, because God does amazing things through prayer. So you might be wondering, how do I find those 20 minutes? Well, we're going to jump back to season 1, episode 5 with Pastor Mike, who actually isn't here on staff anymore. He is now lead pastor at Crosspoint Alliance Church. So, hey, miss you, man. But he does an amazing episode on looking at 3 ways we can see how we are spending our time. So the more time we create, the more time we can spend leaning into what Jesus is calling us to do, and more specifically into prayer. Let's listen in.
We are almost at the end of our series in Nehemiah, and it has been a journey, seeing ebbs and flows of the way God's been at work through his people, through Nehemiah leading God's people, and seeing the walls of the city rebuilt. Last week, we had Graham Gibson bring a great message talking about the worship and the act and heart posture of worship that we saw as God's people were celebrating seeing a wall rebuilt and restored. And as Graham talked about, the heartbeat, the response of those that are rebuilt by God is worship. And he also challenged us, reminded us, encouraged us to think that worship isn't just contained and captured in one way, in one means. Like, it isn't just this always joyous celebration, the gathering together, singing and trumpets and all sorts of stuff, but worship is lived in the everyday life as we make choices and decisions to choose to put God first in a place of prominence and a place of priority. And so as we work through chapter 12 in Nehemiah, we continue to see how Nehemiah tries to build into God's people an idea and an understanding that worship impacts all areas of our life. And it happens on the everyday, the ways when we're leaving the building and heading into our work week, when we show up at school on Monday, when we deal with our families during the week, where we interact with our neighbors and our friends and coworkers. And worship is expressed in each of those different ways and different places. On Sunday, I was talking about the idea of there's ways that we can determine what becomes something that we worship. Part of Graham's comment, teaching a couple weeks ago, was this idea that God is to be worshiped. And God speaks that to us. We read it in Exodus as he gives his rules, guidelines for people to follow, to live a life honoring him. It says, have no other gods except for me. And yet so often, so frequently in life that we place other things in positions of prominence. They can be good things. They're not necessarily bad things, but they just take that place of prominence and priority in our life. And so I said, there's 3 different ways I think we can look at our lives and maybe pull back the covers a little bit to reveal that which we worship, who we worship or what we worship. I said one of the areas that we can pull back and look at the covers is what do our calendars look like? Take a scroll through your iPhone and your iCalendar and see what is taking places of prominence. Where are you filling your time? How are you using it? There's the typical things that we have to do, places of work and school, and those fill our time. But what do we do in the excess, in the margins? How do we choose to use that? Is it something that we choose to continue to pursue God or be used by God to continue to walk with him? Or is it about our own desires and the things that we want to do? The second place I said we could determine what we worship or who we worship is by looking at our search history. Maybe looking at the screen time report we get on our iPhones to say, where am I spending my time? What's consuming those margins as I travel to different places, as I do different things? Are they things that show and reveal that God is in that position and place of prominence or priority? And then the third one I said that we could look at is we could look at our bank statements. How are we spending our money? There's the typical places of bills and things that we have that are on the forefront for us, but it really reveals where we place a priority and how we determine what is first and foremost in our lives. And Nehemiah talks in chapter 12, the second half of chapter 12, or near the end, the call on God's people to bring the first fruits into the storehouse, bring in the tithes from the fields, celebrate what God is doing through the community of faith and continue to see that funded and growing. And lots of times I think we can look at how we spend our money and we have to make decisions to say, well, it's the extra that I have that I'll use and bring back to God, to worship him, to give in tithes and offerings. And yet an act of worship is saying, God, you have my whole heart and my whole life. And I want to honor you with all my energy, my time, my talents, my resources, that it would worship you. It's what Paul writes about as he's writing in Romans chapter 12. We read this. It says, this is what worship can look like. And it says, so dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you, right? It's recognizing his place of worth and prominence. It says, let them be a holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. It says, don't copy the customs, behaviors of the world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. And then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Paul's words, encouragement to say, this is an act of worship, to bring all that you have, surrendering your heart, surrendering your time, your talents, your resources, and saying, God, would you use it and use me to be one who carries forth the message of the kingdom in all the world, to carry with us the message of God's good news of great joy that's found in and through Christ, to demonstrate and live a practice of his love for people as we experience his love for us. So, encourage you to take some time, maybe even pull back the covers a little bit in your own life and looking at what do we worship? What takes that position and place of prominence? Check it out. Look at your bank statement. Check out your search history and check out your calendar and say, God, are you that one who is a position of prominence? Do I make space for you and continue to seek after you, or do I search after other things?
Up next, we're going to hear from Pastor Kirk. We're going to go forward in time to Season 2, Episode 1, where that week, Kirk talked about the wrestle, the tension between work and rest, and how God does call us to work hard, but also rest well too. So in his episode of Deep Dive, Kirk talks about the Sabbath and how we need to intentionally make time for that. And I think that pairs really well with what we're looking in and everyday rhythms right now, because when we make that intentional time to spend with God, we make that intentional time to rest, we do have that time to lean in and commit to prayer, that 20 minutes every day. All right, let's listen in to Pastor Kirk.
Hey, welcome back to Deep Dive. It's Season 2, and this is our season opener today, and we've got some great things planned for this season. You know, one of the things that we're going to do this season is in September, we are launching an audio version of this podcast. You see, each week we provide a video deep dive into what's going on, and we're going to continue to do that. Don't worry, you'll be able to find it on all of your social feeds, just like you did right now. But we're going to add to Spotify and to Apple Podcasts and all those other podcast platforms the audio-only version so that you can listen on the go. Maybe you're like me and you love to listen to a podcast in the car or when you're on a walk. You'll be able to take a deep dive with us through that. So watch for that in September. Be sure to share and tell your friends all about that as well. We've got some great things coming up during Season 2. In just a few weeks, we're going to start a series called What Lies Beneath, and we're going to take a deep dive into the soul to see what are the things that keep us from experiencing deeper intimacy with Jesus. And I hope you'll join us for that. But right now, we're starting off this season by looking at the gift of rest. Recently, I preached a sermon on rest and how rest affirms our identity. You see, in rest, you discover who God is and who you are. And out of rest flows your best self and your best life. Now, I want to talk about a couple of takeaways today from that sermon that we talked about. And if you want to watch it or listen to it, we'll put a link down in the comments for that. But right now, I want to talk about 3 takeaways and a couple of ways that you can get started taking rest today. You know, when we think about rest, or specifically when we think about Sabbath, oftentimes it kind of comes across as a chore, as something I have to do. And that gets God completely wrong. You know, when we think about Sabbath or taking a Sabbath as a chore, something we have to do, we're misunderstanding God's heart for us. You see, Sabbath and rest are not a chore. They are a gift that God gives us. Actually, they're a gift from a loving Father. In Exodus 20, it says, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Make it special. Why? Because I'm the God who created you. I'm the God who created you. And it reminds us back of the creation story when God establishes this incredible pattern of rest and work. And in fact, the first humans, when they are created, the first thing they do is rest. And God reminds us through the Ten Commandments as well as through the creation story that he wants to give us rest. In fact, in Hebrews, it talks about us as Christ followers entering into our rest with Jesus. You see, rest is this incredible gift that God wants to give us. And oftentimes we treat it as a chore or something we have to do. But God wants us to see it as something we get to do. Why? Why does he want us to see it as something we get to do? Because we get to do it with him. You see, it's a gift from a loving Father who desperately wants to be with us, who created us to have relationship with him. He created us to work with him, to be on mission with him, but he also created us to rest with him. And so rest is a gift from a loving Father. It's also something that you need. Your loving Father knows you so well that he has given you a rhythm of rest and work. And he's given us to that in a weekly format, saying, remember one day and just keep it holy. Make it a day of rest, something special. And this applies to everyone, but he also built it into us on a daily rhythm. And he models for us a daily rhythm of rest and work. And see, you were created to rest. That's what Genesis teaches us when we look at the rhythm of how God creates the world. He rests and then he creates, because out of rest flows God's best, and he models this for us in our life. And so God knows that we need it. And so we need to just accept this gift of rest, whether it be on a daily provision or whether it be on a weekly provision, and know that God loves us so much. But the question is, how do you take a Sabbath, right? Because a lot of times, if you're like me, you hear a great sermon like this, or you hear a deep dive in it. The question is, where do I start? Well, as one workaholic to another, let me give you some tips of how I've been able to start Sabbath in my life. When I first started to take Sabbath or to engage in rest as God envisions it, I had to plan for it. I had to plan for it because what I do not plan will not happen, right? Only if I plan it will it happen. And so I began to look a couple weeks out. You know, my life is busy enough that I can't just pivot on a dime. And so I actually looked 3 weeks out. Kind of sounds funny, doesn't it? You got to plan for your rest 3 weeks in advance. But my schedule was so full that 3 weeks, that was the first time I knew that I could practice Sabbath without failing. If I had tried to jam it into the week, I knew I would fail. That it would become a chore that I had to do, not something I wanted to do or got to do. And so I planned 3 weeks out. And then I planned the following week, right? So 3 weeks to start, but then every week after that, I made a plan starting every week to take my Sabbath. Because sometimes life gets busy. And if I don't plan, if I don't start to set that time aside intentionally, I will not take it. The second thing that I did is I began to explore in my life what is ordinary and what is special. You see, God says, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Keep it special, keep it precious, keep it wholly other. That's what holiness means. It's about being wholly other. And so what are the things that are other in your life, right? For me, other means I'm not going to mow the lawn on my Sabbath because I consider that ordinary work. Other means I'm going to sit and I'm going to enjoy a good book because that is something special in my life. I'm not going to do the ordinary work. I'm not going to open up my laptop and respond to emails. That's ordinary work. But I might spend some time on FaceTime talking with my kids because that's special. I don't always do that every day. And so you need to plan for it, but then you need to begin to identify what are the things that I will do and what are the things I won't do. You know, whenever you add something to your schedule, you always have to have a stop doing list in addition to the I will do list. And so you need to begin to think of, as you're planning, about what are the things I will do and I won't do. And the things that I will do on a Sabbath are the things that give me life. They're special. They're unique in all of that. The other day, Britt and I just went and had coffee together because that's not something we get to do every single day. And it was special, and it was part of our Sabbath ritual that week. The last thing that I look for in my Sabbath as I started to do this is I started to think, what are the things that I need to reconnect with? Sabbath is about giving life. And so that means there are special things in my life, special relationships in my life where I need to reconnect. I need to connect with God. I need to connect with others, and I need to connect with myself. This was God's intention all the time. If we look in Genesis, we read about God walking in the cool of the night. Remember, God had this pattern of rest and then work. He walks in the cool of the night. Why? Because he wants to connect with his creation. And you and I, we need to restore connections on our Sabbath. And so remember, it's not a chore, it's a gift. It's a gift from a loving Father who knows you and provides good things for you. So begin today to plan for that Sabbath. Begin to think about what are the ordinary things that I will not do and what are the special things that I will do that give me life. And begin to think about what are the relationships that I need to connect with on my Sabbath. You know, it's going to take some work to really carve this out in your life, to become a person that is resting and working together with God and others. But the joy is that when you get this rhythm right, it'll be a gift that you never want to let go of. Thanks for joining us on Deep Dive. I hope you'll take time to rest this week. I hope you'll take time to actually join us for the next 2 episodes as well, as we talk more about rest. Because out of rest flows our best life, the life that Jesus envisions for us.
Thank you so much for joining this week's episode of Deep Dive. If you have any questions or comments, I encourage you to comment down below or reach out to us on any of our social media. We would love to keep that conversation going with you. I'll link the full episodes of the sermons that those deep dives belong to in the description down below if you want to check them out, as well as I will link to Pastor Lisa's sermon from this previous Sunday because it truly was impactful, and I encourage you to check it out and really commit to prayer because God does amazing things through it. All right, that's it. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you in the next episode of Deep Dive.